All right, so we're going to call this meeting to order. This is the School Building Committee for July 13, 2023. Our first item on the agenda is approval of the June 22 minutes. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
I move we approve the minutes.
Thank you, Chris. Second, Mary? Okay, thank you. Are there any corrections? Okay, then all in favor of approving the minutes, please indicate.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? That brings us to the opportunity for public input. Is there anybody from the public that would like to address the building committee? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. And since it's summer, we're actually going to start skipping the superintendent update because there's really nothing to report at this point. That brings us to our other updates. So maybe what we'll do today, Steve, I'll let you go first and you can give us your update, whatever you have, and then as individual items come up, Richard or Jeff or Adam or Scott can weigh in if they have something to add. We'll try to get through some of the kind of outstanding issues that are out there. So Steve, why don't you go ahead and give us an update.
Summer's progressing, getting a few things taken care of here. Skate hard surface placements are starting next week in pre-K. First, and then grades 1 through 4 will go second. Are anticipated 7/26 weather permitting. As far as building department items, that threshold area exiting the gym is going to be reported next week. Followed up with the solar panel cover. And they did indicate earlier on that it would be mid-July. That hasn't changed, but I don't have a tracking number. Mid-July is in a couple of days. So we haven't heard that that's being pushed for any reason. The dishwasher conveyor is about a 4 to 6 week lead time from placement of order. I think the submittal process has been vetted out with Ben and the design team over the past few days. So 4 to 6 weeks will put us just under the wire relative to school restarting. So that'll be redone.
Okay. The paving, we can come back to some of these items as we move along. Paving.
The paving work has been done. Just trying to get any reline striping rescheduled. Work has been completed. Action. I believe that was, we notified the site contractor of those deficiencies this morning. Contractor to get that area corrected.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what part that was, Steve. The what?
It was the warning track. I guess there were some lippage issues on the warning track that was brought to Bill's attention a
Thank
couple of
you.
weeks ago. We went back and forth on how did it happen, what happened. It needs to get fixed, and we're using our landscape contractor to fix it.
Thank you.
Yeah, the recurbing and the revised A2 survey for DOT, we're still waiting on a curbing date. Pinned down yet, but that's identified of work that needs to be completed. That's pretty much it that I've got.
Okay, we have questions from Chris and then Mary.
Steve, I might have missed this. You talked about the dishwasher, conveyor, piece. What about the pass-through doors?
That's about a 2-week lead time for the correction of the pass-through door. And I think there's either a broken or a missing freezer lock that we have in hand. Just,
Okay, and you said 4 to 6 weeks on the dishwasher, but 2 weeks ago, we heard about getting the shop drawing. So is it 4 to
Yeah,
6
that's-
weeks from,
That's the, I think between Ben and the design team and the kitchen designer and all that, that got vetted out last week, Chris.
oh, okay,
I think that process got completed. The product has been selected. And, it's 4 to 6 weeks.
So let Mary go. Okay.
thank you.
Mary had a question, and then I think I saw Kathy's hand too, and then Chris Kiefer has a point.
I did. So on the topic of the dishwasher, I just wanted to know about, how comfortable are we with that? I mean, that's really cutting it close, and I would hate for people to come back into a building and have that same issue. And I don't know that there's any way around it as I bring this up, but it scares me.
Okay, Kathy, did you have your hand up?
Oh, I did have another question too.
Okay,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry,
We'll circle back on all these topics here. But go ahead.
Steve, I think I might have missed what you said about the gym. Were you talking about that exit door?
Yes. Yeah, the
Okay, and-
threshold that Mike Ninto didn't like how we got it done.
Okay, and that, I'm sorry, I'm
Next
just
week.
working off a couple different devices. That's a next week, because I
That's-
feel like that's
Yeah, that-
another one that we talked about at our last meeting 2 weeks ago. We said that should be done next week, which would have been at least a week ago at this point. Is there anything that's slowing that down, or?
Manpower availability, trying to lock down the sub for the placement. We're comfortable next week is not, I don't think that'll be an item of discussion in 2 weeks' time. It'll be next week.
So the old one is out. That's been taken out. So it's
That's
just a matter of-
correct.
It's just a matter of pouring the new
That's correct.
threshold.
And getting our concrete finisher there to do it. And that's been the problem. He's been backed up on some other jobs, to get him down there to do this little pour. It'll be next week.
And then every time
Okay.
it rains, that gets pushed out again. So
Yeah.
it's weather. So, yep.
Pretty comfortable that it'll happen next week. And hopefully we get Mike to sign off on it and we get that off the list.
Okay, Kathy?
Thank you.
I just wanted to follow up on Mary's question or comment about the dishwasher. It's 4 to 6 weeks before we procure it, before it shows up. How many weeks would it take to do the work? So we're
It's a couple of day install. I would say optimistically, it's 1 day when it shows up. Pessimistically, 2 days. I've got to get some electrical disconnects done before. I don't disagree with you, Kathy or Mary, that 4 to 6 week pushes it to the edge. Can't build these things. I got to wait for the manufacturer to get them done.
But as you mentioned, you can do all the prior work, the setup work, so that as
Yeah.
soon as it comes in,
Hopefully
get
it can,
done.
it would be able to slide right in, remove the old one, slide the new one in place. We don't want to take the old one out in case something happens and 4 to 6 weeks turns into 10 to 16 weeks, the way things go. Problematic. It does work with a little bit of handwork by the staff. So yeah, we'll keep tracking it.
Chris?
thank you.
Yeah, Steve, I'm sorry, I'm gonna beat this dead horse a little more to
Okay.
say, you said I feel comfortable that it'll be da, 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 da. And I don't want anybody to feel comfortable on this thing in the supply chain at all. I really, this has been going on, as you've already heard, that we've been promised for a while, and it was kind of known that it was screwy for a while before that. I really want people to be uncomfortable and to get this thing done. To me, it should be an embarrassment on every level. I certainly think the building committee feels embarrassed that this thing doesn't work. We're giving the kids paper plates and trays and whatever else. Not what we had in mind and not what we need to be doing. So I just want to know that you're not sleeping. At least one piece of your not sleeping is related to this dishwasher not working.
Yeah, that'll be 10 minutes of my night. I won't be sleeping. No, we don't disagree that it's been pushed to the limit again.
I don't know if Adam or Richard, if you got something you want to add to the dishwasher story.
Yeah, so I was at the job meeting this morning in which this subject was discussed as well. Ben Chassie from Newfield reported that that there is a cost associated with this from a vendor standpoint. I don't know about that yet. There may be. I asked Jeff Brown in my office to look at what the original submittal was on the device, whether it was reviewed by who reviewed it, who signed off on the shop drawing originally. So if in fact if what was installed was not what was approved in the shop drawings, then we have another matter. But I would urge Steve to process the purchase of this device, and then we could settle the responsibility subsequently.
Somebody talking, I can't hear them.
I was
Yeah.
talking. I
Yeah,
was
No,
talking.
There's some background noise. from
Oh, all
somebody.
right.
Yeah, it's in our office.
Yeah, Richard, I don't disagree with you. From what we were able to, the information that I've got in front of me, that it was, I think it was a Champion product, and that was what was specified, and that's what got approved. So to Chris Kaufner's situation, I think there's culpability on everybody's part with this thing. I think we would be better served if you can draft up, or Adam can draft up a quick CCD, which then gives us authorization to direct our vendor to get this ordered, because to be honest with you, he's not moving.
Fair enough. So we can draft a CCD and
Yeah.
we'll issue that to you right away.
Yeah, if you could do it tomorrow, we'll have it ordered.
Yeah, we'll do it tomorrow.
Tracking. Thank you.
Okay. Other comments on the dishwasher? It seems like we have a CCD, we can probably move ahead. Okay, other items that that Steve raised, are there questions on those? We can circle around, and then if other things come up, we can come back to things and get input from everybody. Richard, do you want to give your report?
Yes, so as I mentioned, I was at the job meeting today. We talked through a number of items. Let me just touch base on some of them. The retention basin, we talked about that. We did issue a CCD authorizing Newfield to do the work. And we did get a memo from the civil engineer as well as from the landscape architect on that CCD. And we talked about, this morning, we talked about the testing requests that were made in the Fuss and O'Neill portion of that CCD. That's going to take time. And so we talked about maybe avoiding the testing and just going ahead and proceeding with removing 24 inches of the soil that's in the bottom of the retention basin. That will save some time, but then we need to settle on between Newfield as to why 24 inches. So let me back up a little bit. In our first discussion with the Fuss and O'Neill, the civil engineer, their reaction was, well, we think that there's a problem with either the soil or the compaction or both. And the best course of action is to remove all 24 inches of the soil that was placed and get down to the subsurface. The subsurface soils percolate really well. And so if we can remove all of the questionable material, then that would solve the problem. I think Newfield's reaction was that's a little bit of overkill. We don't think you need to remove 24 inches. Maybe we can only remove some of the soil and then either scarify the soil or plow up the soil and get into the subsurface, and that should suffice. I think the problem with the civil engineer on that strategy is, how do we know for sure? And so that's why they suggested some testing of the soils be done. But that takes time. And so that became a subject of discussion this morning. Do we really need to spend the time testing, or should we just take all the soils out and put new soil in and test the soil for its composition, the new soil for its composition, and also test for compaction? Because remember, I said in the beginning, they had questions about the soil composition and secondly, the compaction that was done. So
Steve has a question. So
Yeah, Richard, didn't we have testing done of the soil in the retention basin? I thought we got those results like a month ago.
yes, but what's happened since is that there's been siltation that's been moving into those soils, so we don't know how much of that soil can be reused. That's why we're questioning whether the 2 or 3 inches of soils that Newfield was suggested to be removed is adequate. We really don't know how silted up that material is. Is it 12 inches deep? We just don't know. It was tested.
I thi-
One
yeah,
thing
I
we
think,
never got
just,
though, was
Richard,
compaction.
it was tested, but it was a percolation test. And I think the test that Richard is talking about is a soil composition test. Send this material to the lab, doesn't meet spec. Because
Gotcha, okay.
I think that's really Richard, is that correct? That's really,
Yes, that's correct. How much of it has been silted up? How much of it has been compromised? And that's why Fossil Neal was saying, well, maybe we don't need to remove 24 inches. Newfield raised the point of we only need to remove a little of it, not that much of it. But without testing, you don't know for sure. But that takes time. And is time something that we want to add to this? I know there's great urgency to get it done.
Okay, thank you.
And then there's also the question of compaction. I don't think there's any evidence of what compaction was actually done. I think the specs do call for compaction tests to be done at lifts and that percolation be done at lifts. And we can't find any evidence of that being done in the initial installation. However, the retention basin has water in it now, and it'll continue to have water in it because it's getting quite rainy. So we also talked this morning about getting the water out of that retention basin and what might be the best way to do that. And we did talk about, and ultimately it's really got to be Newfield's decision on how to get the water out. Do you dig a big hole and just get to the subsurface layer and then pump water down into the subsurface area just to get it drained out? Can you pump it up and out and into the dry well that was put in? But then we were told this morning that's not a realistic strategy because the dry well is now silted up. So so in the end, we put Ben on the spot and we said, you need to go back and discuss this with Newfield and decide how to get the water out first, because we need to get to the bottom in a fairly dry state in order to do any testing. If the testing route is we're going to take, or even if we're just going to take the soil out, we got to get the water out. So that's step number one. And that's where we left things in the conversation.
Chris has a comment,
Well,
question?
like you said, it's a matter of time, and no matter what, you need to get the water out and move forward. So And that's disappointing to hear that the dry well is silted up, because that's an indicator the soils are probably not right, right? And we need to get that, we need to pump it out into a truck or something, a pumping truck or something, get the water out of there, dig it out. And I would, my vote would be not to wait for the testing, but to dig the 24 inches out. I think we need to move on this stuff. We can't keep, flipping this coin back and forth all over the place. This is one we can do. We can dig the thing out and move ahead. We're not waiting for a manufacturer, we're waiting for a piece of equipment.
Tony has a question. Tony and then Mary.
My question is, if this is such a continuing problem now, even if we dig it out and get it straightened out temporarily, is it a problem that's going to recur every couple of years?
I'm not a civil engineer, but I suspect what Fuss and O'Neill would say is once the banks of the retention basin are stabilized, and that's been one of the problems, is the banks were not stabilized, and so we had soil eroding off the banks and down into the pond. There is some growth that has started, but I fear that unless that is stabilized, it's going to continue. And it may require some maintenance for a few years before the bank is fully stabilized.
Stabilized with plants.
With
growing.
plants, with
with-
root growth?
Correct.
Yeah.
Mary, had your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Chris said. I feel very strongly that we need to take action on this. It sounds fixable. And if I go back to what Chris Kiefner said about, our last topic, we can't keep putting things off until the school starts. It's an embarrassment in so many ways that we can't, this seems like a small thing relative to an enormous, beautifully designed, state-of-the-art building. We don't want to go back to school with that. We need to, I would totally support, fix it, move on, get it done. We can't keep saying it's going to slip away from us. Summer goes quickly,
So
right,
Randy,
Rich?
Randy, so I guess I would look to direction from the committee. We had issued a CCD initially in which we said remove 24 inches of the soil per the Fuss and O'Neill's request. Newfield questioned that, and so we modified it so that some testing could be done to show evidence of the nature of the soil. If the committee chooses to agree with the first strategy, the first CCD that we issued, then we could re-release that to Newfield and they can get started after they drain the pond.
I don't even think it would take re-releasing. That's the only CCD that's been signed. So it's already still in force.
Oh, I signed it and Randy signed
And the
it?
town signed it, yes. The new one
Okay.
has not been signed.
The new one has not been signed. Okay. So if that's Randy, if that's the committee's reaffirmation of that, then I think we're good.
Okay, I think it might be the situation, but Steve has a question first.
Yeah, real quick, do we have like a scope, like a ballpark on what it would cost to remove 24 inches of the soil versus less than 24? Like if you're gonna do 3 or 4 versus all of it?
I don't know. I don't know, Steve, if you could comment on that.
Yeah,
Sorry,
Yeah.
Steve, I didn't hear you.
yeah, unfortunately, Brian's away for a couple of days.
Are we talking like 5 or 10,000? Are we talking like 20,000 or not even like a ballpark?
Steve, I think the bigger issue in going back to the trade contractor with the CCD is the removal of 24-inch is of material and the additional scarifying of the subgrade below that, which drains well. In their determination, we're like fixing something that kind of already exists, and they consider that unjust enrichment. They want the opportunity to correct what they may feel deficiency on the top layer and allow them to move in instead of a nuclear destruction, oh, just take the dirt out and do what needs to be doing on somebody else's nickel. I think that's really the issue. They want to make an attempt to clean up the silt on the top, scarify the first half of this type 3 topsoil, which was never tested. It was never tested in place. And if we go and remove it, is there going to be a program in place by the design team that they're going to watch the progression of the work, the compaction of, or the non-compaction, and the drain and the percolation of this material as it goes back in? Or are we going to be in a position 4 months from now on the contractor's ticket to do this work and have it repeat itself in 4 months? That's really the core question that we have. And we're going to respond strongly to a reissue of the CCD that's in place right now.
So if I'm understanding, you're saying you don't want to do the contractor wants the opportunity to fix this without having to remove all of it because he thinks there's like a middle ground. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, that's in the opinion of them and Brian Grant, who's been, and Ben Chassie, who've been out there in the middle of that pond, digging things up, looking at the makeup of the material, what the potentials are.
Okay.
And I think we go back to, and I'll speak for Brian Grant, he's not here, I may not be able to answer the question, is the composition of topsoil number 3. Take 60% of sand and 20% of organics and 10% of clean mulch, and that's the material. And it's not very scientific. And you get somebody that may put too many organics into that mix as they shovel it from wheelbarrow or they pre-mix it. It's not an exact science, and there's no guarantee that the soil that goes back in there is going to be the exact composition that Fuss and O'Neill had assumed it would be. And there's a lot of questions here.
Okay, we've got several comments. So Adam, you have your hand up. Maybe let you go first and then Chris McNamara, and then I think Tony has.
Yeah, so for the purposes of delineating, the contractor coming out and fixing work versus enrichment, that can be tracked under the CCD under time and material. So if there's something, so for example, if they're feeling that scarifying the subgrade is undue enrichment, that can be done and tracked and submitted as an additional cost under the CCD. The point, and Richard,
Come on, Adam, you know that that's just a bloody trap. Come on.
that's how the CCD works, right? That's how the contract works. I'm not casting aspersions. I'm just saying that's how the contractual method works. The point of the soil going back in, and this is where I look to Richard for updated information, is when the soil is removed so that way they can scarify it. Did I read correctly from Fuss and O'Neill that the spec calls for testing of the material to go back in place, which would identify if it's type 3 or not? So that would eliminate the question. The point from the eliminating the testing right now is rather than pump everything out, do a bunch of tests to determine 6 inches, 12 inches, whatever. Instead, it's just pump everything out, rip everything out, start the work, and then test as you're putting back in and not waiting to determine how much to remove. It's just a function of, we could get down to the subgrade and maybe it's all full of silt now versus the perk test back a month or two ago. And that would be we rip off 6 inches and yet it's still a problem underneath.
Right.
Point of eliminating the testing option and just removing all of it is not to take into, to take the risk of something else unforeseen happening. It's start from the base, build it back up, and let's not guess. Follow the testing protocol and the spec, and we'll know what's going back in. Is that right, Richard?
That is correct.
But the testing protocol wasn't followed by anybody in the installation in the first go around. What are the guarantees that we'll have somebody there minding the store as this work progresses?
I think we can make sure.
I mean, that would be once there's a lift ready to get placed.
I mean, you read the
Things-
reports, Adam, from Tom at Fuss and O'Neill. Yeah, I scraped the dirt with my foot and I poured a bucket of water in and it drains fine. That was the test report that we received from Fuss and O'Neill.
Point
First
being, when
of
it
all-
goes back in, it would be when the lift is ready to get lift is ready to get placed. You call IMTL like you would do for any test, because IMTL is our materials tester. They come out, they perform the test, do the
They
compaction.
didn't want,
list the
but they
test.
didn't want to do the percolation test. You needed to get another testing agency to do the perk
Then
test.
it'd be the other testing agency. The town can procure the testing agency as we've been doing the whole job. So that the function of which agency has the availability or not, we've got two lined up now. They can do one or the other.
Fuss and O'Neill can do a perk test, for God's sakes. They're civil engineers.
The point being is when the tests are ready to be done, it would follow the same processes during construction. You call for the test to be done and the testing agency comes out and does the test.
Look, Chris, go ahead.
So this is a great example of, we keep passing the buck. We've just spent 18 minutes now talking about something that we've had on our agenda 3 times. I went back to our agenda 3 times. So that's 6 weeks. We've been frogging around with this issue and we haven't done any of it. We haven't removed the 3 inches. We haven't removed more than 3 inches. We haven't done any of it. And if it's going to take us, this amount of time to just discuss it, I'm sorry, Steve, but I'm of the opinion we need to start from scratch and go back and do the 24 inches. And
Chris,
call for the-
Chris, with all due respect, Newfield was the one that called for the global meeting on site to have everybody there to look at this pond. Newfield has been the one out there taking cores of the material to try to identify the product installed. Newfield has gotten this material tested, and we have the information on that material that's been installed, and it is the type 3 soil as specified. So we have done our due diligence. And we're not going to just go down this road and open up our wallet to do something that we feel there's some culpability on other parties' parts, Chris. It just keeps going on and on and on. Have Newfield fix it. We're not going to do any more testing. Have Newfield handle it.
Okay, Tony.
All right. So if Newfield isn't going to do it and the problem is still there, who does this work? And that's a serious question. Who, if Newfield feels that it's not their responsibility because they've already done what they're supposed to do, and we still have a failing pond, I'll call it a pond because that's what it is right now, and I can never remember the correct term. If they're not going to do it, who does it?
Adam, you gonna talk?
If the CCD's been issued, if Newfield does not want to perform the work, then we would go back to the contractual methods for identifying another contractor to perform the work in their stead. They would take the time to procure that and get that in place, but that would be the mechanism to do that. There are provisions in the contract to go forward if there's a non-performance of work based on a scope of work called for.
So if in the contract as it exists, does the contract require that this drainage system function? Is that a requirement of the contract?
The base documents, yes, but more pertinently, it's part of the CCD that was issued. The CCD once signed becomes part of the contract saying perform the work.
And the work includes making it drain.
That'd be necessary to perform the work. You can't get to there if you can't drain the water out.
All right, so then it is our position that Newfield is responsible even if they don't want to do the work.
Correct. If they disagree with the amount, then they would submit time and materials under a claim. That's the way to handle that and via the contract.
I mean, these are questions because I don't understand the law around this stuff. So if we say to Newfield, we want this pond to drain and it's in the contract and you have to do it, what happens then?
That's effectively what was done with the CCD 17, is saying, go do this work.
And Newfield is now saying they've done what they were supposed to do and they don't want to do anymore. What's the next step?
We would follow the process for notifying the contractor to proceed, or again, I am not a lawyer, so I'm going to put my lawyer hat on for a second here. It'd be notifying the contractor of the owner's right to continue the work.
Of the owner's right to continue the work? What does that mean?
So it's a mechanism effectively to prevent a situation where there's a dispute about what work to be done or isn't done, but meanwhile, the owner is stuck not proceeding with their project. So the owner would issue the notice and then get another contractor to proceed with the work as intended. So that way you're not stuck with a ghost building in many cases. In this case, it's just a pond we're talking about, not a whole building, but the mechanism is the same.
And the cost is borne by whom?
That would go through likely a claim process and getting into some of the more legal elements of it.
Right.
No, to answer your question about if it was a different contractor, for example, to do it, the owner would perform the work and then would submit a claim would be the appropriate mechanism against Newfield.
Okay,
Instead of
now
owner who lives
Newfield
there.
did the work or did Fuss and O'Neill do the work? I'm confused on this.
Fuss and O'Neill is your civil engineer through TSKP. Newfield and their various subcontractors performed the physical work in the field.
That's the work of creating it, but not the rectifying it.
That's
That
the
was
work.
directed in the CCD.
Okay. So this building committee have to decide then whether we are going to order this work done or
Okay, we got a number of hands up here,
Yeah.
but yes. But the CCD essentially did that, right, Adam?
Correct.
Okay, I see Rich has had his hand up for a while, and then I see Kathy's hand up.
I may have missed this. Steve was talking about, the nuclear option versus the other option. And if we do the non-nuclear option, can that be done? Do we have enough time before school starts to do that testing and then to rectify and whatever?
The discussion at the meeting today was almost certainly not, based on the amount of time to pump out the time it would take to get someone to pump out the water, get the tests lined up. Some of the tests need a specific staff member who's certified, get them out there, get the tests, report the tests, analyze the tests, and then actually come up with the scope of work. It is very likely that route would exceed completion before start of school.
Scott, you have your hand up.
I
And
think
and then Kathy, sorry, Kathy. I'll do Scott.
Rich
No,
and
no,
Kathy.
go ahead. Scott, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, there's another component here that we discussed. And again, I am very disappointed after our meeting in the field 2.5 weeks ago that I thought that this was going to progress. But to date, the turf establishment, grass establishment, everything else is not, I think in my opinion, but I would defer to the engineers, established enough to mitigate siltation of the bottom of this area. Now, they went ahead and installed 2 stone wells to help this drain. Now what we're hearing from Newfield is that those are all silted up. So at this point, there's another component of this is Newfield is obligated to establish the grass and protect this area for silt migration. There were drawings in photos that I sent to the Colliers team for distribution from the stormwater management consultant saying there was a complete lack of check dams, and you can see in the swale that runs towards the detention basin the amount of sediment that was heading that way. Steve just mentioned that, by the tests, the material that they placed was adequate and met the specification. However, now it is all silted up. Now, we could go ahead right now and muck out the bottom of this thing. We certainly need to determine a path moving forward, and it was part of the meeting that we spoke about, 2.5 weeks ago when everybody was in attendance in the field. But without establishing the areas, the walls in all the things that drain towards that pond to mitigate siltation, you could muck it out and have the same issue. So I would strongly disagree that, Steve, you may have put the material in that was the correct material, but you failed to protect that material. And now it is not functioning, as well as the stone dry wells, as you guys have stated in the meeting this morning, are silted up and not functioning.
The material test that we took was 2 weeks ago, not at the beginning of the job. We went ahead at our own nickel and had this material tested, Scott. There is a layer of siltation on top of this type 3 soil that is as hard as concrete. And the subcontractor wants an opportunity to get in there and clean it up. We cored through that layer of this hard pack and had the lower section of the material tested. Interpretation of the test results, it meets this kind of nebulous spec that Fuss and O'Neill put together. And that's all we're saying. You want us to do step Z without allowing the trade contractor to do step A.
So, okay, question from Steve and then Tony.
Why hasn't the contractor gotten in there yet and broken it up already? Like, to me, it sounds like if you put a hole in a piece of sheetrock while you're moving a machine around the building, you don't wait for the building committee to say, oh, go fix the hole in the sheetrock. It's like, it's not right, so you go fix it. But now we've lost 6 weeks.
I won't disagree with you. We were close to having that pond drained out by its natural course 2.5 weeks ago, and we were going to progress. But after 5 inches of rain the other day, we kind of got set back, unfortunately. But don't disagree that, yeah, we were ready to just get it done. And we wanted to know for ourselves, is our trade contractor correct in his assumptions or not? Like, go do it. That's our opinion. Go take care of it. If you think that's what it is, clean it up. And maybe the next rain event, we'll analyze the situation, and if it drains, it's all good.
Okay, Tony, next question then, Kathy.
I keep thinking, what's to keep it from happening again? And Scott's point about the banks and the feeder, whatever the trenches or whatever they're called, is really important. I'm going to suggest something totally different from anything anybody has been talking about. And that is, we do the absolute minimum right now, the absolute minimum, break up the bottom and spend a year getting the soil, getting the banks of these areas stabilized with grass and stuff, because it doesn't seem to me it makes any sense to do major work if in 6 months the banks are going to drain right off into the pond again. So I would suggest that we really set a time schedule that says we'll try the absolute minimum over the summer, spend a year getting the bank stabilized, and if we still need to do something in the next summer, we do it in the next summer.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I agree with Scott to the point that those banks need to be stabilized. And I think if we do this bare minimum, step part A, and remove this hard pack that's on top of this material right now, remove the water, clean up the hard pack, get our landscape contractor to put silt socks in along the toe of the slope of that pond to control any additional siltation till this grass material establishes itself, I think that's step one, and we would like to progress in that manner.
Oh, Kathy, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just a question. Do we need this pond?
Yes.
Time to fill it in and plant trees? Put a couple benches and have some shade? Do we really need this?
It's a stormwater retention basin. It's not a pond. It's just functioning as a pond. So it's designed to catch all the stormwater from the site. So I don't think we can get rid of it. We have to have it.
Yeah, this has gone through planning and zoning, and wetlands reviews, engineering reviews. So to change it now.
So
would
we
be
have
a-
to have it.
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
So Richard, in terms of what Tony and Steve just talked about, you have thoughts on that?
It sounds like a good step to give the contractor the opportunity to work with the subcontractor and come up with a quick fix. And do you think that could be done, Steve, before school starts?
Richard, stop the rain, and I could say yes.
I can't do that.
Yeah, I think when Brian comes back on Monday, we can put a plan. So I mean, we've got 6 solid weeks. August is always the month that it never rains, so let's pray that we get a good stretch of dry weather. And handled properly.
That means that the committee will continue to meet while this goes on. I mean, Tony suggested something that will take quite a bit of time. Maybe we don't have to meet every month, but periodically going forward. But the first step would be the minimal step that the contractor is offering to do. I think it's a good idea.
I
but
think
that-
it's the fact that it's a compilation of these slopes need to be stabilized. I think silt socks at the bottom and maybe even the top of the slope get installed. We get this hard pack that's down in there right now out of there, enhance the material, till it up, enhance the material with an additional 3 inches of type 3 soil, and let's watch it. Because if everybody remembers, I think it was maybe the first month this pond drained fine, as I recall, but I don't know that for fact, but I've got pictures of rainstorms and this pond draining off, and it seemed to work, and all of a sudden it stopped. Just
So
would like to-
what we need is a follow-up to the meeting we had, and Randy was there to witness this, and I thought we had agreed to that Richard and his engineers were going to put together a draft, and I provided a very high-level overview of the steps that was going to get then reviewed by Newfield. So a very specific plan of action could be put in place on time periods. What would be done so people didn't go ahead and do something that was contradictory to what the engineers did, or establishing the slopes, or work that would be turned into negative work. So again, I'm going to ask Richard that you work with Brian, work with Newfield, work with your engineers, and between Newfield and TSKP, we need a written plan of exactly timelines, approach, what we're going to do to resolve this, which includes establishment of the grass, establishment of the sidewalls of the detention pond, siltation protection, how we're going to dig it out, what kind of machines we're going to use, what the timelines these are, and then a follow-up. So I would ask that be established, because I think that will help move this forward. Thank you.
Scott disappeared.
Sorry, I've had my mic off. Chris, and then Adam, and then Mary. I'll have hands up.
I think Tony's offer is very generous to have us continue to meet and do this simple, easy way to try to figure it out. And I can see why it's desirable, but we're talking about a detention pond. This is nothing net zero about this. These are built thousands of times every year. And there's silt socks and all these kinds of things are a natural part of what you do when you build these things. They perhaps weren't done properly the first time, but I think to drag this out and to do this is a very generous offer on Tony's part, and I'm sorry, but I'm going to disagree with it. And it's not like this was rocket science. This is regular stuff. It's done a jillion times, so.
Okay, Adam can weigh in and then Mary.
Just for the purposes of moving forward, which is the overwhelming, resounding comment I'm hearing from the SBC, there's nothing about the CCD as issued that precludes draining the thing and removing some of the crud from the top. If you're eliminating 24, eliminating the first 3 is part of that 24. So for the next couple steps, there's nothing stopping the drainage of the pond and getting down to the soil and starting to remove things. So it's a function of the actual the steps and the requirements and what gets stabilized, when it happens, etc. This other work can continue while that's all getting ironed out if there are additional details to be ironed out. That's all just part of what's already in the CCD. That's it.
Okay,
So
thank you.
I think that's a good point. Steve, can you proceed under the terms of the CCD and which says remove 24 inches, remove how much you want, and let's see where we are.
I'm gonna defer until Monday when Brian gets back, but we'll huddle up and we'll respond to Scott's point as far as the timeline, as well as some steps of action to award the contractor an opportunity to correct what we consider a deficiency, and that's the siltation of the pond and the top layer.
Okay. Mary, thanks, Steve. You have Mary, something else?
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of things I want to comment on, and I can't remember the last 3 I wanted to say. But what Scott was saying before, I feel like that's a really good course of action. If in fact, today, the committee agrees that we want to go with that proposal that Tony just graciously, as Chris said, put out there. And right now I am landing in the same camp as Chris McNamara. I think we need to get this done, and we need to get it done right. And I think it's hard to make a decision right now because we're not quite sure about different costs, and we got to check with different people. And I think if you said to me right now, we need to vote on this, I don't feel like I have all the information that I need. I feel like my head is spinning, because if it's in a document that's part of the contract that says it should be done, I'm having a hard time understanding why it's not done and why we have to keep revisiting this. I don't know that I understand the situation any better now than I did. How many minutes has it been, Chris, now?
Yeah,
Almost
it's ongoing. Perhaps, Mary, I can try to explain why. So Fuss & O'Neill's a conservative approach, which Steve called a nuclear approach, was to remove all the material and replace it.
Yes, I understand that
And I
part.
believe
Thank you.
Newfield's position is, hang on a minute, that seems a lot of work that you expect us not only to do, but to pay for. And we would rather not commit to that. We would like to do a less ambitious approach. And I think what Steve is saying, let Brian and the subcontractors respond to what they propose to do. Am I putting words in your mouth, Steve? I think that's what I heard you say.
No, that's pretty much it. I mean,
Yeah, and
it
I
affords
think that
us-
that's a
it
great
affords-
summary, but I
it affords
worry
us the
that,
opportunity to enforce the contract that we have with the trades. Going beyond that, we get into some other issues.
Okay, Tony.
I really want to come back to the stabilization of the sides of this stormwater retention area. If we are relying on roots to stabilize the soil so that there doesn't get to be silt in the pond, that's not something that we can say make roots. I mean, roots take time to grow, and that's the thing that I keep thinking. if the source of the siltation is a natural thing, that is that soil is washing out of banks that have not fully been planted yet, then you can't fix this thing without waiting for the roots to grow. No, I may be misunderstanding something here, but I don't know what it takes to stop the silt from arriving in this area. I mean, I know stormwater carries some silt. I know it carries sand. I know it carries pollutants. I know it carries all kinds of stuff. But at some point, we have to say we have to reduce the damage that's coming into this area, the damaging materials that's coming into this area before we can say that we can fix it, because otherwise it'll just happen next year or the year after, as far as I can tell. I mean, nobody's explained it to me in a way that says that you can fix it without dealing with the source.
If you take it all out and it silts up again, then you're back at square one. Okay,
So I think it's pretty clear, isn't it, that Richard agreed that Steve's approach made sense? Take out the amount he thinks is going to work, and if it doesn't work, then he's still got work to do.
right, and in the meantime.
We want the
got-
problem fixed. I mean, we don't actually care how it gets fixed. We want it fixed. We want it done ethically, but fixed.
But maybe it can't be fixed
No, I
in the
understand.
time frame that you want, because
It
the
isn't, it
state-
already, no, it won't be fixed in the time frame we want, but you're absolutely right. The banks have to be established with vegetation. There's no question about it.
Okay, so Steve, and Richard, I guess you have, like next steps.
Right. I'm around, Steve, so if you want to get together early part of next week when Brian's back, I'm all for it.
Oh, Peter has a comment.
What I've not heard was any way to drain the pond to expedite this. Given that we're having a rainy summer, I heard this morning that it was just dismissed as, nope, can't do it, too expensive, no place to put the water. I don't necessarily agree with that, although maybe it is expensive. But the problem with this approach and the potential of a rainy summer is that this just gets perpetually delayed until the fall, when we know that we then start to head into hurricane season, nor'easters, and we're done. And I want to just remind the committee and all about elevation and the whole reason for those dry wells, that we were concerned about that water breaching the banks. And then we have a wooden gym floor that's not too far off, and potentially some other areas that one would be a potential to the building, but just having standing water with kids and not a substantial fence around that. You know, I know that the area was designed to have standing water, but not to the depths that we're seeing. And so two things that I would just like people to consider. One is, I've not heard Newfield talk about a serious plan of how to expedite the water, using pumping, whatever you need to do to get the water out of there. And number two, a long-term plan to ensure that we're keeping kids out of that area. Again, you know, it can be temporary fencing, but I think we need something a little more substantial should this drag on and go beyond the summer months and kids are returning to this area. And then finally, I just want to remind people about the neighbor who's very close to this area. And so the disruption in work in this area does have potentially an impact on our neighbors.
Steve, I guess in your plan, you could address the water. If there's anything to be done with the standing water.
Yeah, there's methods to evacuate that water.
Methods, you said there's methods to evacuate the water.
Yes, I mean, I think digging a plunge pool, I think, is the wrong approach, and there's other ways to get that water out and trucked off the site.
So will you do that?
We will figure it out. With removing the water, we need a stretch of weather that it doesn't rain on us and the water comes back in. That's what we're kind of like been looking at. We got some rain coming.
Okay.
We should talk maybe then about a substantial fence. One that will probably have to be in place for a while. Am I hearing the building committee saying that that would be something you would like to add?
Well, what's up there right now is
Didn't hear it.
not,
You didn't hear
adequate.
it, but I think you would if we spoke.
what's up right now is not adequate for long term. So we would need something.
That's the question I'm asking. You want to get a price for that?
Yes.
Well, I think this is long-term. You know, I don't think this is going to go away, even if we are on to something. To Tony's point and the discussion around the siltification and stabilizing the bank, that's going to take a while, and potentially we're going to have situations where we have standing water that's a little deeper than what was designed and intended. So it can be temporary, but I just think that it needs to be a little more substantial and obvious, so that we are keeping kids out of there and keeping people safe.
Yeah, that's why I asked the question. I think it would be the prudent thing to do, because I agree. It sounds like it's going to take a while to fix.
So yes,
Yes,
maybe.
yes, go ahead.
Okay, I will send a PR to Newfield.
Okay, so Richard, I think we were in the middle of your report, actually.
Oh, was it the middle? Okay, so I know there's been complaints raised about the noise level in the cafeteria. We did get a proposal from Jaffe Holden, our acoustics consultant. I think it was $3,500 for them to come out and evaluate the acoustics in the room. But when Jeff and I were there this morning, we did talk about the acoustic panels that are installed in the cafeteria already. And the question came up, we believe that they were painted. We know that they were painted, but were they painted appropriately? And I suspect not. Again, I'm not an acoustician, but when Jeff and I both looked at the acoustic panels, it looked like they were painted over quite a bit. I couldn't see any texture to the acoustic panels, which has, I'm sure, compromised the acoustics in that room. So I'm going to ask Newfield to look at those acoustic panels, and if they can get back to their painter and determine how those panels were painted, because there are manufacturers' guidelines for painting those panels, and I'm not sure that those procedures were followed. And if it turns out that they were not painted in the correct manner, those panels are going to have to be replaced. Sorry to say. There's a fair amount of panels in that cafeteria space. That would be the first step. That would be my first recommendation, is to replace those panels if in fact the painting of them has not been done properly. The only other thing I wanted to report is that we did do a walkthrough, Jeff and I, to see where we are on open punch list items. We did get from Ben Chassis an update from Newfield's perspective, and a lot of work has been done. I was there to do the architectural walkthrough with Jeff. On Tuesday, we had Cola Ronan do the walkthrough from the mechanical standpoint. This is the building only, not outside, not site work. There's still quite a ways to go before we do a final walkthrough there. This was not a final walkthrough of the building. It was an interim walkthrough that we were asked to do just to see what the status of things is. And a lot of work has been done. Back in February when we issued the initial punch list. Just as a reminder, I know it's been a while, but the substantial completion which was achieved on January 24th, 2023, and then we issued a punch list that was attached to that certificate of substantial completion. At that time, just looking at the building, architectural and mechanical components, open items were valued to be $367,000 worth of open work to be done. Today, based upon my walkthrough and Craig Raza's walkthrough on Tuesday, I believe there are still open items, but the value of that is approximately $77,000. So I'm going to reissue an update on those items. Again, it's building only, architectural and mechanical components only. So to give Newfield an update on what I think are still open items. And that's
Okay.
all that I wanted to report.
Okay, Rich has a question.
Yeah, Richard, are there acoustic panels in the classrooms?
Yes, there are.
I would suggest that we would also look at the paint, whether how they were painted as well, because I know that teachers have been saying that the classrooms are quite loud. And the other question I have, I don't know if this is the time or the place for it, but is there any updates about the ventilation system and the noise level that it makes when it's ventilating?
I'm not entirely familiar with that issue.
Adam
If-
can
I
address.
can jump in. I can jump in on that. So.
Yeah, if you have a location or locations of classrooms where people have expressed concerns about noise.
Craig has that data, Richard. So this topic is part of the overall HVAC and heat pumps issue that's been reviewed at the commission in meetings. We had another one today where there's been troubleshooting along the way with thermostats and this, that, and the other. Ultimately, it's boiling down to why are 3 of the heat pumps still having issues despite all of the various items. Steve was on the call and Steve politely asked his vendor to get out there Monday or replace the units one way or the other because this is going on for too long. So that was appreciated. So by the end of after Monday, when they're on site, we're expecting an email on Tuesday. Was the direction at the end of the meeting to get an update on whether or not the units were fixed by the manufacturer or if they're intended to be replaced and what the time frame is on those. So all those HVAC issues with the whistling and the cold and the tripping that Bill Treach has been experiencing in the mornings where there's some alarms going off, they're all linked to these 3 heat pump units, is my understanding.
Are these issues related to the acoustics or noise level that Rich mentioned?
There was some whistling, Rich, correct? It was coming through the vents themselves and not necessarily the overall noise level in the classroom. It was just sort of a periodic whistling.
The noise level has to do with like when children are in the classroom. It can get quite loud in those rooms. And so that's why I'm thinking that whatever the issue is in the cafeteria is probably also an issue in the classrooms.
That may be. I heard about the cafeteria, so I looked in the cafeteria more closely today. But if you could help by through the committee or through Colliers, get me a list of which classrooms you've been hearing are problematic, that might help me isolate that.
I'll forward you what I sent to Craig, Richard.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, does that conclude your report, Richard?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Adam, do you have anything to add?
The only things I would add that haven't been discussed already, the monument sign is moving forward. The town gave sign off on the shop drawings from the contractor there, the signage contractor Artifacts. So they're finalizing the procurement, so that's still on schedule to be completed before start of school. And we'll talk about the stone cap when we get to procurement. And then the only other item was there was some ponding water encountered at the south side of the playground when they were digging out to put in some of the base. Appears to be an issue where some of the pipe was clogged up or water getting into the pipe. So Newfield and Stonehenge were on site looking at that, digging it up to identify the issue. And is anticipated that they'll have a analysis of what's going on over the next day or two to resolve that. The notion is that that won't interfere with the rubberized surfacing is what we heard at the meeting today, or that schedule of getting that in place. But since it was discovered, it should be taken care of. So that way it's not an issue in winter when water can freeze if there was a late rain or something to that effect.
Rich, you have a question?
I promise to stop talking after this. Richard, the issue with the noise, I forgot to mention, is on the main level. Any classroom that has those 2-story ceilings, it's not on the 3rd and 4th grade classrooms. So it would be that main level.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, questions for Adam? Okay, then I guess we can move on to the PCOs.
Yes, I'll share my screen here in a second. So there's a number of items up for review tonight, and I will try to follow the order of the draft motions. So the first item up is an item that came up through Jamie, the IT director, and facilities in conjunction with some of the discussions at the OAC meetings and having Richard input with regard to some additional locking mechanisms at the main entry door. There was a little write-up that Jamie had done that was included in the meeting packet, which I'll show you on the screen. But basically, for just under $4,700, the intent is to provide some additional, basically automatic unlocking that can occur under the supervision of the secretary, to provide some additional security. So that way, not only is there a buzzed in entrance once someone comes into the building, but then there's a second buzz in that can occur. So that way, if someone sneaks in behind because they're just going fast and the door is open, there's an additional opportunity for the administrative office staff to again secure who's getting buzzed in and who's not getting buzzed in. So that is the proposal from Sonatrol for $4,690.
Okay, Mary?
I'd unmute myself. I'd like to make a motion to approve that quote for the additional door entry locking hardware and programming for the main entrance from Sonatrol per their quote in the amount of $4,690.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second? Steve? Any other questions, comments? And all in favor of the motion to approve, please indicate. Any opposed or abstentions? Okay.
Okay, item number 2 and 3, they are linked. It's with regard to the wall, the stone wall and the cap. So at long last, there's been some material that's been found. TSKP has reviewed. Basically, they're granite stone pieces, so they're a little nicer than the field stone. They won't have iron rust pitting, and they can be sourced. The reason why there's sort of 2 put together in the approval is the first is to actually release the material from this additional vendor, Swenson Granite Works, for $4,200 to procure the stone. The second kind of component to it is PCO 144 from Newfield, which is a credit back for the stone that was sourced by their subcontractor. So effectively, you get $2,600 credit and spend $4,200 for a net of just under $2,000 additional. The stone will be delivered on site, and then Newfield will take that and install the stone that was procured.
Okay, Questions? Is there a motion? We'll do these motions.
I'll move, we approve it.
Okay, we have two separate ones to
Oh,
do.
sorry.
Uh,
Then maybe Mary can handle that.
It does have numbers.
Let's see. I think I'd like to make a motion to approve the quote for granite stone wall cap material from Swenson Granite Works per their quote dated July 12th, 2023 in the amount of $4,207.04.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second? Steve, seconds? Okay, and we'll take the vote on this one before we move on. All in favor of the motion, please indicate. Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, thank you. Okay, go ahead, Mary.
So I would like to also make a motion to approve PCO 144 dated December 27th, 2022 for a credit in the amount of $2,640 for stone cap material for the seating wall.
Okay, so this is for credit. Does anyone like to second that? Okay, thank you, Tony. All in favor, please indicate. Any opposed or abstentions? Okay,
All right, the next one, Newfield PCO 156. This is for, it's an item, all these items are already complete. They were items that came up as subcontractors identifying costs that were incurred for various reasons. These items were reviewed by TSKP and Colliers for whether or not they're good to approve or not. And so all three are being recommended for approval for the committee. So the first one, 156, this is to change some of the overhead stops at some of the exterior doors where there was a conflict where the doors as specified didn't geometrically work with the stops as specified. Richard, if I've got that correct. So there was a cost to Newfield to have a different door stop in place to make it fit. And that was $5,781.
That's correct. This is the closer as well as stop at the head of the door.
Chris?
How is this categorized, Adam?
This is being tracked by Colliers as an errors and omission.
Thank you.
Okay, is there a motion regarding this? Mary?
Yes, I would like to make a motion to approve PCO 156 dated January 16th, 2023 in the amount of $5,781 for changing overhead door stops.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second? Rich, thanks. Then all in favor of the motion, please indicate. Any opposed or abstentions? Okay,
The second is PCO 192. This is for $1,174.80. There was a discussion with the building official where there was an interpretation from the building official that some hinges need to be removed from a fan in order to meet code. The discussion was whether or not the manufacturer required that or not, and part of their intent. Ultimately, the hinges were removed to satisfy what the building official was requesting. And that cost $1,100 to remove those hinges from the fans on the roof.
is there a motion to? Okay, Mary?
Yes, motion to approve PCO 192 dated May 19th, 2023 in the amount of $1,174.80 for removing exhaust fan hinges per the building official.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second? Steve, thanks. All in favor of approving this, please indicate. Any opposed or abstentions? Okay,
And the last item is PCO 193, the amount of $28,1548. This is for a change to the feed to the transformer where it wasn't 30 amps and it needed to be 30 amps. I think that's about the long and short of it, Richard.
That's correct.
Why did this happen? Why wasn't it the right amperage to begin with?
The contract documents, I believe, call for a 20 amp, which was insufficient.
And again, what is this powering?
One of the transformers. There's a feed from the transformer to the building, I believe.
We really don't know then. And as I said, I don't have any clue what this means. Is it inside, outside? Is it underground? Is it in the walls? Where is this going on?
I'd defer to Richard on this one. I'm not electrical engineer.
Yeah, so this has to do with the heat pumps. It's indoors. And it has to do with the pumps associated with, I can't remember which heat pumps, but it had to do with the service, the electric service to those pumps.
Thank you.
Okay. Then is there a motion to approve PCO 193? Mary?
Yes, it's motion to approve PCO 193 dated May 19th, 2023, in the amount of $2,815.48 for increased electrical feed to the transformer.
Mary, is there a second? See Rich, thanks. Then all in favor, please indicate. Any opposed or abstentions? Okay.
Sorry, I forgot to indicate.
Okay. That then brings us to an executive session. We have a motion to go into executive session. Yes.
I'll do it. I move,
Okay.
we go into executive session pursuant to Connecticut General Statute, section 1-200 sub 6 and section 1-210 sub B for discussions of contract revisions due to project delays. And this executive session shall include the Colliers, both Adam and Levitas and Scott Pellman, sorry.
Okay. Oh,
And the superintendent of schools.
Thank you,
Second.
Tony. Is there a second? Steve, thanks. So everyone is welcome to leave. Okay, we've come out of executive session, back into open session. The time is 5:57. Is there a?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Adjourn. Thank you, Steve. Is there a second?
I'll
Chris,
second
thank you. See you all later.
Thank you. Thanks.